All right, everybody. Welcome to this critical conversation, Educating a Black Child. We are so happy. We want to make sure that everybody is with us. We are Edutainment for Equity. We do consulting, but we also do a lot of arts education. And we've been hosting this particular conversation for some time. This conversation is presented by Edutainment for Equity and sponsored by the Department of Children, Youth, and their families from San Francisco. This is an interdisciplinary conversation about the future of Black children, featuring experts in education. We've been having this conversation for over 4 years. Scholars, practitioners, artists, and activists who are engaging in the process of figuring out what the best ways are for African-American children to be educated. If you, during this time, want to tweet something or post something, we're asking that you use these hashtags, hashtag Edutainment for Equity or hashtag Educating the Black Child. We want to start with a land acknowledgement, recognizing that we here in this conversation are broadcasting from the ancestral land of the Ohlone people. We want to recognize that. We know that our audience is spread out in different places around California and perhaps around the United States. So we want to give you a prompt or encourage you to acknowledge the land that you're in and the indigenous and ancestral ancestors whose land, who occupied that land, who blessed that land, whose ancestors still are buried in that land. We want to acknowledge that. We also want to recognize that this is not a new conversation, that centuries of this conversation have been happening. Scholars, activists, some of the greatest thinkers of African-American people have been wrestling with educating Black children, trying to figure out what are the best ways to make Black children literate, what are the best ways to empower Black children to face the challenges that this country continues to confront them with, trying to solve challenges for parents to figure out what are the best ways to provide a future for future generations, to think about what does it mean to educate this generation for the next generation? What does it mean to have that in mind as we go through this process? And so usually we highlight a couple of these really important educators. So today we want to call out Asa G. Hilliard III, former Dean of San Francisco State, and just a great African-American scholar. And then we also want to call out the Honorable Mary McLeod Bethune for her work in making sure that our people were literate, that we had a sense of dignity, and that we stood for something more than the suffering that we endure. This conversation is really about context. So providing a global context for this moment in time, we're talking about education during the coronavirus crisis. And we're looking at the reality that 89% of the world's student population, 1.52 billion children and youth, were actually out of school. 267 million children, not in education, not employment, not in training. And this is globally. So it's something to think about, that we're not just talking about the impact of what's happening in the Bay Area, but when we talk about the impact of not having school, of not having formal education on the planet, what that says about the future. We're looking at 9 out of 10 children being out of school, and teachers needing additional support to teach students online, but not necessarily having that support. And looking at the numbers globally of who's actually trained with technical skills to teach and who's not trained. We also want to think about the fact that online learning, that there are many gaps in online learning globally and locally, that a lot of young people don't have computers in their homes. They don't have access to mobile devices. They're not really connected in that way. And so moving education completely to that space leaves a lot of people out. And this diagram on the right is just to illustrate that schools don't stand alone. They're not in a vacuum, but that they exist as part of a broader system of employment, a broader system of support for families, for community institutions, for health and social protection agencies, and employers in business. And when kids are out of school, that means business is closed because parents need to be at home. It means that community institutions are impacted because kids cannot gather as a collective. They cannot gather in groups. Health and social protection agencies are really dramatically impacted when you have a national or international or global health crisis. So it's something to think about, that schools do not exist in isolation, but they exist in systems. It's also important to recognize that COVID-19 has also exacerbated other challenges that already existed. And here's one major challenge, is violence against women and girls, and how COVID-19, by driving people into their homes and by sheltering people in place and by putting these women and girls in isolation, it has led to an increase in violence, a decrease in their security, and a decrease in their health outcomes. And it's really important to recognize that sheltering in place is not a solution. It's something to deal with the pandemic, but it also exacerbates other problems that we need new strategies to address. And here's Betsy DeVos. Here's the Darth Vader. And this is kind of our transitioning into what's happening in the United States, and the argument around who should be in school, the constant myth that we've been told that children don't get the disease, children are not impacted by the disease, and therefore educators won't be impacted. And let's look at this. According to the CDC, children make up 7% of the cases. That's a national average. That's not a local average. In the state of California, that number is 9%, close to 9% of children between the ages of 0 and 17 years old who have coronavirus. Now, if you look at that statistic just flat out, without looking at it demographically, 9–10% may not seem that much. But when you recognize that 34% of the coronavirus cases are Black or African American, and 40% of the deaths are Black or African American, then it makes that number 9% in the state of California actually much higher for African American students, much higher for indigenous students. And it's just something to think about, that these statistics sometimes actually forward an idea that make us feel safe when in fact we're not quite as safe as we might think we are. This last statistic is really important because this is about investment into the future. So that's how stocks operate. Stocks don't invest in the past, stocks invest in the future. So the future that the stock market is investing in right now is one where we work virtually, socialize virtually, shop virtually, exercise virtually, dress casually, and invest in our homes where we spend more time, much more so than we did in the past. And that's just something to think about, that people are at home, people are in more isolation, but somebody makes a profit from that. Somebody is making money from that. And there are definitely vested interests in maintaining the current system as it exists and not returning to what it was, or not even transforming it to something new, because there are massive profits being made. And here we are all on Zoom right now, and their stock is up 531%. So we're not telling you to panic. We think that these kind of statistics often lead people to panic, to like this crazed sense of despair. And actually, we feel like these statistics, information should empower people to plan and not to panic. It should make people feel more prepared than to feel like they're just under assault. And so in this moment, in this time, we want to give you all a moment to reflect, to think about the statistics, to think about what you're experiencing as a result of coronavirus, the way it's impacting your interactions with your young people, the way it impacts their interactions with education. And we just want you to reflect on that and give you time to do a little free write on that before we really get into the conversation. We feel like it's as important for you to be in touch with your own thoughts about these ideas, as it is for then you to interact with these scholars and practitioners whose lens and experience can perhaps expand your own understanding of what young people, families, and communities are facing. So this moment right now is for you to take maybe about 4 minutes and write to yourself, you know, how do these statistics impact you? And what is your plan or vision for building the resilience in yourself to face these challenges? And in the meantime, I'm going to give you some music while you do it, because that's how we do.
Rise up, don't be afraid. Stand up for your sister. Gotta stop this charade. People putting down what you do. Sisters need your help and brothers to let your heart be your guide. Your strength can push us through. Progress, we can't run away. This world needs a new life, a new order today. Brothers caught up in what they know, lost sight of how to listen, learn, and grow. Open up. More love you must show. Let's move toward a brighter day. Together we can find a better way. Rise up. Let's move toward a brighter day. Together we can find a better way. Rise up. Let's move toward a brighter day. Together we can find a better way. Rise up. Let's move toward a brighter day. Together we can find a better way. Rise up. Let's move toward a brighter day. Together we can find a better way. Rise up. Let's move toward a brighter day. Together we can find a better way. Rise up. Let's move toward a brighter day. Together.
All right. That was the Freedom Affair. Name of that song is Rise Up. That song just came out like a day or 2 days ago. Hop on it. And we're back. Educating the Black Child. We want to introduce our guests, our panelists. Our first guest that we're introducing is LaShawn Chatmon. She's the executive director of the National Equity Project. She is one of the leaders, one of the giants in the field of equity and of understanding what's happening in schools, what's happening to educators, what's happening to young people. She's the person that scholars go to. When people are doing research, they go and interview LaShawn Chatmon to find out what they're doing. So we bought the Scholar, you know what I'm saying? National Equity Project, focus, really is about delivering on the promise of a quality education, which is interesting. Who made that promise? Whose responsibility is it to deliver on it? Achieving equity by design, I think, is something that is really interesting because it actually points out that the systems that we're currently operating were also by design to achieve inequity, to achieve injustice, and that you have to have intention for equity in order to achieve equity. There is another way. And LaShawn has pioneered and supported many new design ideas about what schools could look like, what education could look like, not only for Black children and Black families and Black communities, but for all children and all families, and with a special interest and a special emphasis on those who are most marginalized, those who are locked out of opportunity. And I put this slide with the computer there just to give you an understanding that this is not something that this new virtual reality is not something new for the National Equity Project. This is not, when people understand the nature of the system, then they know how to devise strategies and plan and prepare way before these crises hit. And LaShawn has been ahead of the game for a long time. One of these incredible projects that she's helped support is the work of Dr. Micia Mosely, who's the founder of the Black Teacher Project, which is about recruiting, developing, and sustaining Black teachers. Such an important and critical thing, not only for now, but it's been critical for us, for African-American people since we arrived on the shores of this land, recognizing that without Black teachers, we wouldn't be able to read and write right now. So all of these different strategies that are used to empower Black teachers, recruit and empower Black teachers to design new strategies, new systems. Every child, no matter what their race, no matter what their ethnicity or background, deserves a Black teacher. And this particular slide, I think, is important to think about Black Teacher Design Lab. What does it mean to design labs for Black teachers? What does it mean for teachers to be in the process of designing equity, designing new futures for their students, particularly for their Black students? How far in the future are we looking when we're thinking about designing education? And in systems that are exclusive, we know the school system is designed to be exclusive. So how do you have diversity inside of a system or organization or school that's designed to shut people out? And so the Micia Mosely's work, Dr. Micia Mosely's work, is a lot about attacking, undermining, understanding how these systems work, and then undermining them. Inserting justice where injustice has been allowed to exist, been allowed to be promoted. And LaShawn says, equity is not a destination you arrive at on accident. It's critical for leaders to articulate a shared equity imperative or aspiration to guide their organizational development work over time. So that's something for everyone who is watching this webinar, who is an educator, that the work that you're doing in your classrooms, the work that you're doing in your community hubs, the work that you're doing in your organizations, how intentional are you on the design for equity? How intentional are you in the design of that program for justice? Are you adopting systems that were there before you arrived, that were clearly coming from a foundation of injustice, of non-exclusion, non-inclusion? Or are you trying to design these systems in a way that they're more inclusive and that the outcomes are stronger for those who are the most in need? And so with that, I give you our incredible panelists, LaShawn Chatmon and Dr. Micia Mosely. And if you're in your little vlogosphere or whatever, just clap. Just clap in your house, clap. And welcome to our guests. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here with us.
Hey, greetings. Good morning. Good morning, fam.
And
this is very exciting. I'm not even gonna lie. This is super exciting.
So first of all, thank you. Thank you not only for giving up your Saturday, but also just thank you for the work that you're doing on a broad scale. And hopefully this conversation could be an opportunity for you to recruit some people to the movement, right? Some people who may be in it and not realize they're in it. Some people who may be on the fringes and not fully understand what we're facing. And then those who are naysayers and need to hear from scholars like you. Many people don't ever get Black teachers. So to listen to Black professional educators can be a unique experience. So I would first like to start by just getting from you a sense of what you think is going on and what you think is the imperative for educators at this time.
Well, I'll just start and pick up on something you just said, Hadari, which is kind of the idea about recruiting people into this movement. So good morning, y'all, and thank y'all for getting up and being with us on Saturday morning. I because the truth is we're all in it right now, right? The couple of things that this unique first kind of COVID-19 pandemic is affording us is a shared experience. Now, we're not all having the same experience, but we are having a common experience, and we really are all in this, right? And so part of what the National Equity Project believes is that it's our work and our responsibility to create a world that works for everybody. That's our work, right? And so if we're talking about it relative to schools and education, that we're trying to actually, our organization works to build the capacities of people to design organizations and school communities wherein young people can learn, develop, grow, and thrive. And that we know that takes work. We understand that the systems that we have been operating in, we start with the premise that they're inequitable by design, right? Not for that to be bad news or for us to be blaming anybody, but to suggest that part of our work as leaders is to make what has been invisible visible, so that, and to reconcile with our past so that we could actually create better futures. And part of that lack of reconciliation with our past, we are seeing in the unfoldment of all these other pandemics, many of which you actually, the pandemic of racism, the pandemic of kind of economic downfall, the pandemic, right? All of which actually have some ties and impacts that are disparate by race, right? And so design is a critical element. Like we are being called upon right now to vision and to design a new future. And I mean, I would just say largely, because you started with with some global data, which I really appreciate, because make no mistake about it, the questions and the issues that we are grappling with that are in front of us right now are existential in nature. This is a question about who we will be, right? Who will be as a country, who will be in our communities, right? I mean, on every level of our system, who will we be? What kind of schools will we create from now? Who will we be in our communities and neighborhoods? Who will we be in our cities? Who will we be as a nation? Like, that's what's at stake right now. Not actually, will my kid learn algebra this, between now and January? The questions that are confronting us now are larger, and they have to do with our absolute humanity and survival. So I'll stop there.
I think that's huge. And I think thinking about the existential sometimes can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how we bite off our own individual piece of this existential challenge, how we take on our piece of the pie.
That's right. Right.
I think a lot of that is about, first and foremost, understanding who we are. And who we are, often when we ask that question or we examine that question, we look at it through an individual lens. But I am me because of we, right? And so we have to understand who we are in context. And the gap for many of us between who we are and who we wish to be. And so I see this moment as a time for us to step into the people and the communities that we want to be. So, a lot of folks sort of capture this time as really, we're struggling, this is difficult, this is hard. And it's not to underestimate the challenges that people face, but I get excited so, you know, I'm a history nerd, started as a history teacher. You know, we all did. And right. So there's a way that to live through a historic moment, like there's no question. We thought when Barack Obama got elected, it's like, ooh, there's our history. Nah, we are living through this global moment. And so when we think about the history of what we know of moments like this,
Mm.
you know, we all remember when there wasn't an internet, right? And how the world has changed just with that development. So given that we understand how much the world can change within a generation, right? Maybe two, understanding who we are and how we want to contribute and recognizing that there's no limit. So I think sometimes we get limited by these pre-existing frames, but when you think about a world without the internet, like you said, we're on Zoom now, right? What would this look? We have some indication of what this looked like prior to this kind of technology. So the opportunity for this moment and to walk in concert with others. So I think this is a great example of that, right? We could just have this conversation with 2 or 3 people, but being able to have it in a larger group and to really think about what do I bring to the table, right? And so, you know, for those of us who remember Y2K, y'all remember Y2K, right? So I remember I was like, "Ooh, I can't grow food, I can't sew. What I'm gonna do, right? If it all comes." But that was like the first wake up call for me to really think about what am I contributing to my community when push comes to shove. And so I think in this moment, really continuing to both prepare ourselves and take action with the knowledge and skills that we have now, and to resist doing it alone. This is a moment that is trying to tell us to be alone. The fact that we can't be physically close does not mean that we should be alone.
Mm.
Find your people and get at it.
So I think that that makes me think about the young people themselves and kind of the children who may feel alone. They may be isolated behind a screen. You know, they see their classmates through the screen. They're losing this regular social engagement. And I'm wondering um, your perception of the long-term impacts of that, and then the things that I would say well-intentioned educators can do to mitigate those challenges without, um, you know, without endangering people's health. So what do you think about that?
Well, I'll take one step back and then I'll come right back to your question, Dara, because you asked kind of what is going on, right? And so a lot of what is going on, a lot of what's gone on since March, right, was people responding to the idea that all the structure fell away, right? Everybody was sheltering in place, and schools were, and literally the school buildings were closed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, actually, to speak to Micia's point about both doing it alone, but also trying to do the same thing when everything about the context has changed. And so one of the things that we are watching schools do is to try and retrofit, right, everything that they were doing in a school setting, right, when we were in person, in a virtual environment. And I mean everything, including, right, the organization of the school day, right? And that you would put young people. There are some young people who are sitting every day, 4 or 5 hours on the screen, right, with some breaks in between, but literally that their school day is built as if they were in um, an in-person environment, which the truth is, I don't think that we're going to know what the harmful impacts are for young people. But here's what we do know, right? That the urgency around ensuring learning for young people is not just academic learning, right? And our lack of concern for the social and emotional development and well-being of our young people is equally, if not more important, in this moment where they are isolated and we are actually not in physical proximity. And so just giving ourselves permission, again, our work, us acknowledging kind of where we are and acknowledging disparity, is not the endpoint. That's not the point. The point is to actually understand where we have urgency to do something different. We have to actually be thinking and engaging and acting differently in this time. And that includes giving ourselves permission to say, we are not going to do a regular 7-period school day, and try and shove math and English and history decontextualized from all of the text and data that we are actually taking in as a society right now. We're gonna actually keep reading the stuff that has for which our young people don't even have any context for. And by the way, I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to ask young people questions about the meaning that they're making about what they see happening, what they're watching every day on social media, what they're experiencing, how their families are doing, right? I'm not going to do any of that, because that makes me feel a certain kind of way, right? Whether that makes me feel fearful that I might not be able to contain what young people say to me. So to act like we're going to just keep doing school, right? And not give young people an opportunity to make some meaning for themselves about what is happening, which is not normal, right? Around them, is ludicrous. But that is how deep, right? That is how deep a mental model of schooling actually is. So we have to figure out a way to break that open. We have to figure out a way to give ourselves permission to think about the next system, the next way of being, the next understanding of learning. And so I'll let Micia jump in, because we've also been working very much with teachers, and that, all of that, to say nothing of loss and grief that all of us are experiencing on different levels, right? Where they're like, where is space for people to actually just do some healing, to name and acknowledge the grief and loss, and physical loss, as in death. People have lost family members, right? And we've lost people in our community, but also the loss of physical proximity, right? Teachers have lost that too. And that's not insignificant by any stretch of the imagination, right? And so I'll let my sister pick it up.
Well, I'm going to pick it up right there, because I think this.
And I just want to say that designing futures is a little bit about what I hear as designing futures. And I think that that's designing futures not only for the young people themselves, but also thinking broader about what educating young people does for community, what it does for the future of presence, what it does for the future of opportunity. And with that social isolation, how do you move from being, in your home, kind of marginalized in your education? How do educators design new educational experiences under the circumstances that we're currently in? I think is an interesting jumping point for people to think about what they can do, like what's practical for them to do, because they're not going to defeat Betsy DeVos. The way to defeat her is one classroom at a time, one engagement at a time, one relationship at a time. So, Dr. Mosely.
Yes, so I'll make a connection. I think part of how we address loss and acknowledge the impact is to focus on healing. And so much of our work is focused on healing and leadership. And so we recognize that we've all been harmed by the system. Before we even talk about COVID, just the history and herstories, and the fact that this was never designed for us, right? And so for those of us who've been able to jump through whatever hoops to become teachers, if you're not paying attention, you'll get confused and you'll think that you've made it. And sort of that's it. And what you've done is you've made it to the place where you have an opportunity to do some real work and to create some change. But you have to be clear about the harm that you've experienced and have space to heal from that. Otherwise, you'll reproduce that harm, even saying all the words that people know to say, right? In the name of, right? I do it because I love you, right? That kind of harm that you don't even realize what you can be up to. So I think having space for adults to heal and understand how they can create those spaces for young people to heal. So sometimes we jump to try to heal young people, but because we're still harmed, we're still dealing with our own trauma, those spaces don't quite get it. And young people can see right through it. They're like, why are you trying to tell me and you're not right? Right? You're not taking care of yourself. So I think having those healing spaces, which is a lot of what we do, is key. And we assert that healing, self and community care. People talk about self-care, but it's self and community care is part of professional practice. So just as LaShawn was saying, we have to reimagine, like, what are we up to? This is your job. Your job is to heal so that you can hold the space for others to do the same. The second thing is that reimagining. I really want to shine a light on the 26 teachers who just the flyer that you showed was from our design lab. We engaged 26 teachers from across the country to focus on what healing looks like in their classroom, how to center healing in their classroom, and how to design for that. So these are kindergarten, middle school, high school teachers who did that design work. And it began by listening to the students. Too often people think, oh, you're 5, 6 years old. What are you going to tell me? Right? I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you exactly what I need, exactly how I'm making meaning of this moment. And that is the information you need to be able to design a classroom setting, virtual or otherwise, for me to do this healing work. So part of this process involves listening, and listening with humility. Because, while I appreciate, yes, I jumped through those hoops to become Dr. Mosely, that gave me access to do work. That's what those degrees gave me, access to do work. That doesn't mean that I know more than that 5-year-old about what that 5-year-old needs. I got to talk to that 5-year-old. I got to watch them. I got to pay attention. So this notion of where expertise lies can be a driver in the steps that you take. If you understand, and that's why I said before, you have to start with, what do I know? How do I want to get in and fit in? And if I know that I'm a bridge builder, I know very much, people say I harp too much on Generation X, but as Generation X, we are bridge builders between the boomers and the millennials. We've been bridge builders our whole lives. And so this bridge building that educators must do involves being able to listen across age groups, across differences, across positionality, listen to parents, listen to young people, right? And then go tell what they said, because you're in a position that other folks are not.
Wow. I just want to breathe all that in right quick. And I want to say that before this moment, it's interesting that we were talking a lot about how kids were having too much time on their screens, that screen time was a huge problem, that was way at the fabric of family, that communication between people was being undermined by screen time. Adults, parents were having a hard time talking to their kids. Schools were wrestling with social media for the attention of children in the classroom and on the campus. And now it's almost like a dramatic shift into like, get on the screen. Not only is it get on the screen, but I'm occupying your screen. Like once I share, I own I'm like colonizing your screen with my ideas, my vision, my views, my perspectives. And I wonder where the argument about screen time went.
Exactly.
Right?
And what long-term impact? Not an 8-year-old granddaughter or goddaughter, and she's having social screen time with her classmates. Outside of the screen time that's already designated in the school, it's like, in order to have a social moment, I need to be back on the device to actually have a real relationship with people. And so I don't know, what do you think the long-term impact of all of this stuff is, considering that this was a big argument that we were having in January and nobody's talking about it in October?
I mean, it really is deep, right? Like of the statistics, Kadari, that you named earlier, one that is missing is one that folks are just starting to actually do some study around: anxiety and depression. right? So the lack of actual proximity and social relationship, right? And let's remember, right? Knowledge is a thing that is socially constructed. We need each other in order to actually be learning, and that is a social process, right? And so how we are trying to humanize, how we try and work, and this is why we use the word design and why we're so intentional about talking about it, right? Because things are designed either with intention or without it, they actually contribute, right, um, to the inequity that we see. But there are ways, and we have seen school communities. We support school communities. We try and model this in our own work with adults to humanize what this engagement, even in this modality, means, right? And so we still use music, and we use boards, and we use all as many things that are at our disposal, including talking about emotion and healing and giving people some room to breathe and connect and put them in breakouts and actually have them reflecting on and releasing some emotion so that they can be clear thinking. Distress, right, for any of us, for all of us, for young people and for children, lead to unintelligent thinking and uncaring behavior.
Mm.
That was true when people were in person, right? And communities in distress, and impacted neighborhoods where everybody is tightened and screaming and yelling and there's no joy, right? Like, we understand that that is still happening, right? Even in this modality. So to be in a place of agency about it means we can learn together ways to engage with each other that allow for our humanity to still be brought forward as much as we can in this environment. And it's important to not shun that, because the the converse of that is actually just somebody talking, right? And young people who, by the way, most are not actually showing their physical face on the screen, right? My 11th grader is on with 200 kids every day in their high school right now. He's in a small high school, so it's only 250 of them, but they've got, this assembly time where the majority of the kids actually aren't even showing their face, right? So so this is what's so wild, right? The intention of bringing the school community together is to be in community, except they're like this. You see what I'm saying? Like, and so everybody is I won't say pretending. I think the intention is the right intention. It's the right move to try and figure out how you bring your babies together in our school community and say, hey, y'all, like, here we are, what we're doing, and blah, blah, blah. But to not ignore when it's not working, right? When you're actually not connecting with young people, right? And so, because as Micia says, like, the young people know, they're like, you are saying words and putting stuff on the screen. But then nobody asked me how I was this morning. Right? You don't know what I'm going through. You know what I mean? And I haven't been able to ask anybody how what they're doing. And so, there are ways to design so that we can be human together, even in this modality. And that has to be tended to. Because otherwise we're just pretending that simply because I have my computer on and my box open, that I am present and available for learning. And that is not true.
So interesting to me because there were all these obstacles that were easily blamed for the challenges that teachers had in engaging young people. The school is an oppressive place and they got to go through security to get here. The difficulty of walking to school in the morning. I don't know what's going on in the home. Well, Zoom gives you an opportunity to see what's happening. I mean, you can see the home if you can turn the camera on. And although a lot of those other obstacles don't exist anymore. So now there's new obstacles, there's new challenges. And teachers are exposed. A lot of times teachers are the only people the young people see. In this Zoom experience, you only see one human being. And so that's education. Like, that's the person who is basically school. You're not really checking into an institution, you're checking into an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a totally, it changes subjectivity. It changes the relationship that I have to the broader community. Why am I even going to school if it's not to serve or better my community? And how does showing up on Zoom make my community better? So there's just so many different, because the design, and like you said earlier, if the design is to maintain what was, if we're just doing what was happening, then the question is, how does me studying Shakespeare through Zoom effectively impact the challenges that I'm facing outside, literally outside my door, like not outside the school door, past the security and the principal, but like literally right outside my door on my front porch.
Right.
Well, I want to give a couple of examples of the flip side.
Please.
I'm just gonna brag on the Black teachers in the Black Teacher Project. Just gonna brag on them a little bit. So first and foremost, just some tools that I think teachers can use. So I've been connected to a government class, 12th graders here in Oakland, and one of the things that one of our fellows does is she's not sweating if the cameras are off. There's an expectation that you may or may not have them on. And there are specific times. So first off, she asked for feedback pretty early on, and students gave it and said, I really like it when you give us advance notice when you want us to have our cameras on. They like class conversation. And so she'll give them 2 days notice. Hey, we're going to have a full-on conversation on Thursday. We're going to need cameras on. So do what you need to do to get your environment ready. And so they're excited about it. They want to see each other. They said small breakout rooms are terrible. It's just two of us in there. We have our cameras off and we're not saying anything.
Right.
Like, bet we'll have breakouts with groups of 4 or 5, right? And she hops around. But hear me when I say how did she get this information? Right. She asked and listened to them, right? So a couple other things I wanted to say. In the design lab, teachers were sharing their practice of Tell Me Something Good Fridays. So one person does it on Mondays, one person does it on Fridays, right? But the idea that they are supporting students to see what they can affirm in this experience that we're having. And what it does, they said the whole class after that, like it's not alone, they don't take the whole class to do it, but that Tell Me Something Good day brings a whole different energy into the room. It allows students to build community and learn more about each other, but to also remind themselves that there are good things even in the midst of all of this difficulty. The last thing I'll say is that what I think, you asked what are the implications for the future. I'm a big Star Trek fan. I'm not, Black people are in the future, Afrofuturists, shout, right? And what we know about the future and first of all, if you haven't read Parable of the Sower, that's your next book. Because if you need to get to about what we need to do, Octavia was breaking it all down.
Gotta come on.
Right. And we know that screens and video and technology were already forecasted as part of the experience, right? What I would say, though screen time itself is the problem of that on us physically hasn't gone away. What it has afforded is the opportunity for connection across distance. I'll say from the adult perspective, this design lab, we had teachers from Kentucky who were like down the street from where Breonna Taylor was killed, trying to think about how to put healing in the middle of their classroom with teachers from San Francisco, right? And Bayview Hunters Point. So the conversations that they were able to have across elementary school, like context, was powerful. And so we're starting to connect with folks from the Ivory Coast. Some of our Black Teacher Project fellows have just purchased land in Ghana. So they're not waiting for me. They're about to build a school in Ghana so that we can do some lab work there. But the idea what I would say is that I think it's important for us to see this technology as opportunity. Who are the cousins, the aunties that you might see at the family reunion that now you can see on Zoom? And for those of us who are educators, check in on the baby cousins and what's happening with their education. Ask them how they're doing. So I think it's important for us to not only see this as a limit, but to really pay attention to the opportunity for deepened connection across time and space. Because a lot of folks have access in a way that they didn't. Obviously, a lot of folks also are limited.
Yeah, I would just build on that with a couple more examples because there's several things. So my partner runs Kingmakers of Oakland. They are like deeply King-centered, committed to engaging, empowering, and encouraging Black boys. But one of the things that they're doing, this is to Micia's opportunity point, a time and a moment for us to challenge everything. And if we can be humble, right, for just a little bit, and understand that one, we're all learning, and that our young people, it's not just listening to them, but understanding and positioning them to lead in this moment is also something that we have to do with intention. Like, that's not going to happen by accident, but just like the young people will tell you what they need, they'll tell you what's working and what's not. You have to commit to actually asking, that is the data that you need right now to help you make decisions about what to do, right? They are the data. Their lived experience is the data, what they're saying their needs are, what they're saying their hopes and aspirations are, but they also can be leading in this moment. And so to Micia's point about understanding about the opportunity to be in this medium and be connected to people all over the world allows not just for us as educators to actually be able to harvest those good ideas that people are, to be more connected to like what it means to be sitting in contexts that are more deeply impacted. Like, we get to learn and soak all that good stuff up, but our young people get to talk across all of those contexts too. And so Kingmakers did a town hall with just young people, where they led conversations with young people who are all over the country right now, and how they were experiencing school and learning, and for them to talk and engage with each other about what this moment meant for them, right? And here's the thing, and this is why we have to be careful as adults, right, to kind of claim what we think we know, to be claiming what we think we know of their experience, right? Because it was as wide and as varied as any of our experiences would have been as adults. And it went from young people hearing and listening to young people in Lancaster, California, talk about witnessing, being and bearing witness in their city to a lynching in 20, right? And so, well, they were talking about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and they were like, well, let me tell you, blah, blah, blah. And then let me tell you how we haven't had any opportunity to say anything about any of that to any adult, right? Not in school, not in home, not, right? And so that listening is essential for our healing and to give us direction and information about what needs to be done, right? It's essential, right? Equally as essential is drawing people in our communities to help us, right? The game is changed, and the questions we get to ask now are, who can actually help us rebuild, right, these places of learning? We already knew school wasn't the only place that the kids are learning, so let's debunk this myth right now. Young people are learning a shit ton right now. Now, it might not be, the algebraic equation, but they are learning some things, and they're doing some of their own learning, right? If the goal actually of education is to actually foster independent learning, let's be clear, my 11th grader is on like this device, right? He's accessing for knowledge and for like questions that are just up for him right now in ways that he never did in school, right? And so, and because they are so deeply connected to each other and to what's happening, then the questions that they have, they actually are accessing information to and asking each other. And so we have to take a step back, right? And not make assumptions. Learning happens everywhere, right? And the question we have to ask ourselves as adults is, what are young people learning from the stuff that we're doing and not doing right now? Because they're learning some stuff about that too, right? They're learning stuff about who matters, about what matters, about what we're prioritizing, right? They're learning about what we prioritize every day when we put curriculum in front of them that is still, that seems unbelievably irrelevant in this moment, right? And we're still forcing it to them with no better explanation about why or how it could be connected. That is not right, right? I have a junior in college right now, and because of the work he's doing in community, he is feeling the tension, right, between trying to stay in his virtual college experience, right, and feeling every day that is more and more and more unrelated to anything that actually matters in this moment. That's a hard conversation to have with your kid. Like, just stay in it, right? When I'm like, I totally get it, right? Like I totally understand that. And you know what I mean? And to let him grapple with that. And for me not to step too far into that. So I mean, all of these decisions, yeah, there are lots of opportunities. Our young people are learning lots of things. We should ask them what they've learned. We should ask them what they learned how to do last spring when everybody first sheltered. We got kids gardening and building, you know, our kids are growing cucumbers in a little plant box on our deck, right? Because they had the time and they had the, you know, and not everybody has all of those opportunities, but they could if we tapped into you know, Auntie Vivian who was down the street. If we you know what I mean? And so I just think we have more available to us than we're using. And part of it is because we won't acknowledge that our teachers are also everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, wow, thank you. I feel like both of you are so generous right now. And if I wish there was a crowd of people here, because I would, if anybody seen me host this before, I'd be like, did you hear that? If you didn't hear that and you're writing something down, what are you doing? Like, if you're not writing down and taking notes, you're tripping. This is class up in here.
Notes. I'm like, right. That's right, Shawn.
I have a 1-year-old. And so my perspective has shifted a lot in terms of how I perceive education as it is now and what it will look like 25 years from now or 20 years from now. And I'm thinking about 18 years of schooling or education or whatever that looks like, and kind of looking for hope, looking for a reason to send my child to school, and thinking about who's going to be there when they get there.
I love Black teachers. I love Black teachers. Sorry. Come on, Black teachers.
At first, I think a lot of times when we hear the word teacher, we think of something that's very formal or something that is kind of structured through a colonial idea of what it means to be certified, validated, to have the right information or the right approach that's based on an institutional past, a systemic past, and not necessarily on the population of young people they're teaching. And so that's one thing that struck me. And another thing is that I felt like I was a better teacher before I got a teaching credential. I felt like I was a better teacher before I sat in classes and learned how to become a teacher. And their story, their testimony of being first year, second year, third year teachers and still being able to do something that was innovative, that was full of their own energy, their own like excitement, and then it was contagious, not just for people watching the video, but for those young people dancing behind them, for the school community that they represent. And I think this is a little bit about what is possible with Black teachers, and even kind of a tip of an iceberg of possibility. That how do we tap into that? How do we encourage more people who may be kind of on the fringes of the education experience? Maybe they're because of the formal nature of credentialing and validation and so on, they may see themselves as like, I only work in after school, or I'm just a tutor, or I can only kind of work at this distance with the teacher as bridge to the young people. And I'm just interested in, Dr. Mosely, what you think about what it means for a new generation of activists and young people to take on the challenge of educating our children, to take on the future. Like, what do you?
Yeah, and I want to start by acknowledging that you and LaShawn have been consistent in your push of me in thinking like the teacher in Black Teacher Project, right? When we first started, we're like, how do we help people sort of navigate the system and get through the system? And over these last 5 years, it's like, you know what? That's not it. That's not it. It's not about getting through and just hope you can make it. And so I think that tension is this moment is making that beyond visible. And I think where we started in the beginning of this conversation about this being a movement, right? Like we've changed our mission. Like the mission we had in the beginning is not, the mission that we have now, because we recognize we have to shift the system. We've got to reimagine schools. There's no reason to recruit people into something to just be part of this system that's not working. So our recruitment, as it is about like, who's down to change the world and change the world through this path? If you riding like that, come on. And so I think that we have to understand the possibility of schools and not the limitations. As I often say, all words are made up. When people talk about, is this a word? I'm like, it is now, right? That's how language works. But there's a way that, again, that whole, like, how are you getting in? How do you want to position yourself? And to know the history, these tests that we have to take to become teachers, these tests, the SAT, all of this, these were all designed to keep Black folks, immigrants out. They were all, so to the extent that we say, oh, I can't do it because of X, Y, I can't get past that test, I can't get whatever, it was never designed for you. So that's not about your intelligence, that's not about your possibility. So I would say for folks now, if you are working with young people, if you have access to young people, one, give thanks. Give thanks, because there are a lot of folks who would love to be able to be near young people to understand what the future could be, and see where you are as an opportunity to make a worldwide difference and to instill in young people the possibility of something beyond what they can see. Our ancestors were imagining this. They were imagining generations to come. They weren't imagining, like, how do I get the babies to fit into this system? Right? Like if we take it back to the plantation, they weren't like, ooh, how do I get my babies to, no, how do we get free? So your job is to imagine. We do an exercise where we get people crayons and markers, and I would invite everyone to do this exercise. Draw what liberation looks like. Draw what a world without oppression looks like for you. Because when you're around young people, that's what you're working toward. So you've got to give yourself the space to imagine that and to not be caught up by these systems. Those of us who are working in the field right now, or in the environment of school systems, we are doing it to create open gates, right? As gatekeepers, we're trying to open the gates so we can blow this whole thing up. So if you're in an after school program, if you're in, I know San Francisco has these hubs where students come to log in. If you're working in those environments, consider for yourself, how do I make this space liberatory? How do I make this a space where students can be as free as those folks in the video, right? Because it's not about being confined by the rules and regulations. It's about understanding the possibilities beyond those regulations. Our ancestors learned how to read, not because they followed the Funk and Wagnalls, whatever. That's not, no, they went over to the caves. They went over underneath the tree, right?
Or waited until it was legal.
Right, exactly. And nobody wait till it's legal. They're like, you know what? We're about to do this right now, right? The quilts that we talk about, the messages, like the messages in quilts, for those of you who don't know, using symbols, that goes back to hieroglyphics, using symbols to be able to create pathways. So some of this stuff might need to be underground. If you're getting friction in your job, take it underground. Take it to a place where you can be able to move beyond the so-called limitations.
That's beautiful. I want to encourage everybody who's listening. If you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A area. If you have testimonies that you want to give, if you want to throw an amen, or you want to throw your hand up or whatever, or send us an emoji, put that in the chat. Because we're moving to the last 15 minutes of this conversation, and we want to make sure that we have your questions answered. I guess without going too deep, because I don't want to turn it into a lecture, but I do want to arm people with a sense of vocabulary when they're asked, what do they believe their children are facing, or what do they believe what is the role of institutional racism in what we're experiencing right now? I'm trying to give people a quick and dirty, because a lot of times when folks are asked about institutional racism, it becomes a long abada diatribe, and it's like a tapestry with a lot of holes, because we don't have an education system that has empowered us with the language to even analyze systems of oppression in that way. And unless we individually sought out that knowledge, like unless we individually went and read those things, or had scholars like Dr. Noguera, who was all of our professor at one point or another, like unless they exposed us to that, what do we rely on? So I don't know, is there a way to get a Schoolhouse Rock version of institutional racism?
I wish I could be like Miss Williams with it. Be like, what's poppin'? Let me tell you about this. I can work on that. Like she's like, I'm like, she's gonna make me step my game up, or Miss Williams and Miss Evans gonna make me step my game up. I would just say quickly, because it's not that deep, right? When we talk about institutional racism, we're talking about the ways in which policy and practice, right, create differential outcomes based on race. So I'll take some really, both a negative example and a positive and a positive response to it, albeit one would think it would be utterly unnecessary. So in California, there have been district and school policies created to police hairstyles of Black girls. Young girls being suspended from school because of unkept hairstyles, right? And this in the last, I think in the last couple months, a bill was passed called the Crown Act. A bill that went to the governor's office called the Crown Act to protect against the unfair treatment of Black, largely girls, who were being suspended from school because of how they're wearing their hair. That is an example of a racist institutional policy, something that was sanctioned by the institution that was creating this disparate effect. That good enough? That's just one example, right? There are many. There's so many examples, but that's a recent one. And here's the thing, because I want to actually connect it back to what Micia said. The function, the kind of one of, I think, the most insidious outcomes and functions of oppression or of white supremacy is the suggestion that we actually can't change it. We can't undo what's been done, right? And so we don't get to apply our radical creativity or radical imagination or will and protest and resistance to something, to some law, some policy, right? The thing that's holding that in place is white supremacy, right? This idea that we can't do nothing about it because it's always been that way, right? So one of the things that I think it's important to leave people with is, and kind of in the spirit of like what's popping, in the spirit of Williams and Evans saying, like, we understand, like, this has been a hard moment, right? And we got this, right? We got this, and we're going to change what's necessary. We got this, and we're going to do the things that we have to do to make sure that you still grow, learn, and thrive. That's the spirit, right? In which we actually have to be exercising in this time, right? That what was does not have to be, and laws can be changed, and new designs can be made. We have to, and we have to do a check. We have to ask ourselves as Black people right now, do we believe that that's possible? Because if we don't believe it for sure, ain't nobody coming to help free us. So if we're not believing that we can do something about this moment that we're in, we are losing out of the gate. We have to know, right, that we can change both small things and large, and that actually you change the large things by every bit of small action you take right now, right? That the present actually creates the future. And so it is what we do. There is nothing insignificant about anybody who is in this world of education right now. There is no insignificant part of your job. So you be well so that you can keep pushing, right? And so that we can keep fighting and creating the kinds of classrooms, learning environments, communities that all of us deserve. So we can change it. But institutional racism is simply you knowing and being able to see the policies and practices that are having differential impact based on race. We saw them early in voting. We see them in voting now, right? Literacy tests for Black voters in order for them to vote. Those were state sanctioned policies, right, to exempt people from voting. They're doing it now in a whole bunch of ways. So there's curriculum. That erasure and inaccurate history is also a form of institutional racism. So states and districts adopting textbooks that are referring to the enslavement of Black people or the transatlantic slave trade and Middle Passage as voluntary migration, right? That stuff also institutional, right? Like what in the right? So inaccurate and erasure of people in history also, right? Sanctioned by districts, right? And so there's so many forms that it takes. And the question isn't just to find all the forms. The idea here is to look at the structure, go hard on the structure and be soft on the people, to look at the structure, to undo it, to redesign it, and to keep moving and to keep checking that it's going to have the effect that you want it to have, and be soft on the people and know that the people actually have to have some capacity built, some community created around us, in order for us to keep doing the work.
Yeah, I'm a doctoral student at UC Davis in the School of Education, and nomenclature is becoming more and more important to me. And I feel like words like institution, system, structure, they box us into ideas about beams, foundations, things that everything else depends or relies on. And they don't really highlight the amoeba nature of the institutional racism, that it's like water. It's going to find a way to slip under the door, around the corner. People will find a way to freeze it to make it like ice, or they'll boil it to make it find a way to get in the space. And so one thing I would say to folks who are running hubs, or folks who have classrooms, have Zoom rooms where you feel like you can close this existential door to institutional racism, just remember that there are forces outside of yourself that are impacting that space. There are systems and institutions outside of yourself that are impacting that space, but that you can still create an oasis in your space. You still have the possibility of creating liberatory spaces in the midst of these oppressive systems, that your door will never fully lock it out. You could stuff towels under the floor, on the bottom of the door, and you can find ways to try to caulk the windows, but it's going to get in there somehow. And your role, at least within this system, is to mitigate the impact of those toxic forces that are finding the ways into your own systems, into your own thinking, into your own practice. And then how, it's contagious. So you become the carrier who's making the next generation sick. And I think in the context of COVID-19, it's just something to think about, what it means to be a character. What does it mean to put a mask on when you're sick with institutional racism? What does it mean to socially distance yourself if you're sick with institutional racism? How do you limit your own contagion? And how do you address your own sickness? Provide medicine for yourself before you start to try to apply medicine across society, across institutions, across these systems. And it just goes back to something Micia said earlier about, are you okay? Like, are you okay? Are you the person to be in this fight? Now recognize, every person who ever activated on behalf of Black people was sick. All of us in this country, we were subject to these systems, these institutional systems. Even, Frederick Douglass had things to get over. Like Box Turner was in a box. Like, imagine being in a box for weeks. When you got on the other side, you're not going to be just okay, together okay. Like, we all had trauma we had to wrestle with. Micia,
and one of the things I want to note, because I also want to get to answer the question I wasn't able to type. So one, if you go to nationalequityproject.org, click on Join Us, newsletters will pop up for you to get information. So for folks who want to know about the Design Lab, more stuff on the Black Teacher Project, you can go there and sign up for our mailing lists and get that information. But I think when we talk about self-care, remember I said it's also community care.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get your self-care in community. I'm not here without Hadari, without LaShawn. I'm not here, right? In part because the conversations we've had over the years, whether they've been in front of other people or privately, have helped my own healing. And so we have to interrupt the notion that even if you're able to diagnose yourself, that you have to heal yourself alone. And so I want to lift up the power of racial affinity, whether that's Black racial affinity, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander, white anti-racist, like understanding that we're going to need time alone, right? Greg Peters talks about this AAA, right? We need time alone, we need time in affinity, and we need time across difference. Those 3 A's, I believe, are essential to this healing work. And so think about, and so someone was asking about a brother who was in distress. There are a number, we've done some work within the Black Teacher Project, but there are also national organizations, Black male educator organizations that are now virtual, that are, again, this is what I'm saying about, this gives us the opportunity to connect across the miles so that folks who are in distress, these are not spaces just to vent, these are spaces to heal and strategize so that we can uncover, oh, this is how I'm showing up in ways that are toxic. This is how I can heal from this so that we decrease our isolation. So I would just invite folks, sign up on the mailing list. We just completed a landscape analysis of affinity groups across the country that we'll be publishing soon. So folks will have access to this. This is the year to get connected. This is the year, as much as it sounds counterintuitive, but this is the year to get out of isolation. Right. Stay physically distant, stay safe, but this is a time to really connect across the mile. So I just want to lift up the importance of those AAA elements, because we can't come together across difference if we don't know who we are. And we don't know who we are if we don't sit still alone and listen to that quiet voice inside. And if we don't sit with those who are like us, that gives us the strength to come across difference.
So I'm about to do an Amy Goodman, and Mama Shawn, I'm gonna give you the last word. You got 30 seconds, go.
Oh. One, I'd say I'd build on what my sister shared, which is that we need each other, right? We need each other, and we need to find ways to keep building and to keep challenging this system. And this is a moment for us to not go back to whatever we thought normal was, right? This is a moment for us to actually change everything, and we can do it.
Thank you so much to our guests, LaShawn Chatmon and Dr. Micia Mosely. We, first of all, are so honored to listen to you, to hear your expertise, and to get a really strong sense of purpose, a sense of direction. And we will definitely be calling on you again to come back, because we didn't even finish the conversation. There's so much more to talk about. Next month, we're going to have Dr. Naila Saud Nasir, who is president of the Spencer Foundation, and one of the key thinkers about what should be funded, what ideas should be funded, what research should be done, and what's necessary, what's really necessary on the higher levels of education that trickles down to everything that we're doing on the ground floor. And her analysis is comprehensive. Her work is really well known. And if you have an opportunity to Google her to see the things that she's done, the things that she's into before this next time that we get together, we're just really excited to have her as our guest. And we want all of you to register for that. In addition, Edutainment for Equity is offering all of these trainings throughout the month of October. If you are a DCYF recipient, you know you just need to sign up and you can get it. If you're not, hit us up at Edutainment for Equity, and you can get more information about these trainings that are happening this month. Please visit our website. We thank the Department of Children, Youth, and Families of San Francisco for their work. We want to give a special shout out and thanks to our sign language interpreters who have been carrying this conversation. I hope your hands are not as tired as my mouth is right now. Yeah, we're just so happy that you all joined us. We're so happy to have you as an audience. We're so thankful for our guests, and I guess we just want to leave you with the thought that you can make a difference, that the work that you're doing is really making a difference, that our children are benefiting from your presence, that even if you're in isolation in your work, that you're not alone. And hopefully this conversation is a reminder of that, that there's an army of people who are engaged in the education of Black children. There are innovative people with dramatically liberatory ideas about how education can be transformed. And we're recruiting you to join the army, where we're telling you that we want you. We want you. We need more Black teachers. We need more teachers who are focused on the education of Black children. We need more compassionate anti-colonial teachers who are about undermining these systems of oppression. We need innovation. We need new ideas. We need transformation. And we believe that you're the people to bring that transformation about. And so we're so thankful that you joined us for this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. And with that, let me share some music and say goodbye, okay? My wife, Candace Antique, loves you. She would have joined us in this call, but she needed to be in the background making this thing happen, which she did, and we're so thankful for her work. And I'm gonna give you a little more of the Freedom Affair. Have a great afternoon.